understanding what you're good at, making sure you have the right people, having a vision. I think it's very important for you to understand, why are we doing what we're doing? How are we going to do it? And then, what does success look like? And then staying true to your mission.
Welcome back to another installment of the Next Gen Case Study series. On this episode, we have Eric Cramer, who is the president and CEO of River Street Networks. This is a position that he's held since the company's establishment, and during his career in the communication industry, which spans about 28 years, he has amassed a wide variety of experiences and wisdom. And under his leadership, River Street Networks has expanded its reach and services, focusing on providing high-speed internet to underserved and unserved rural areas, which is why we're excited to have him on the program here. Eric, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure here. I'm kind of looking at some of your background here, and you got quite the story. I'd love to get a Coles Notes version of it from your perspective, if you wouldn't mind starting there.
Sure. So I kind of got into the rural telecommunications business as a consultant right out of undergrad, working with small independent telephone companies, which I frankly didn't even know existed. And so what we would do is provide regulatory and financial support for these companies that had to do a lot of filings and things associated with the FCC to receive what was called universal service support. I did that for about 8 years at a consulting firm based out of Greenbelt, Maryland. And I had just finished graduate school at University of Maryland, and an opportunity came up to work with one of our clients in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, as a telephone cooperative called Wilkes Telephone Membership Corporation. So I came there as a CFO. I actually then took over in 2010. I started there in 2005. 2010, I took over. Shortly after that time frame, the National Broadband Plan came out. And that plan was basically saying that the way that the subsidies are received for rural telecom companies that receive these subsidies because they operate in very high cost areas throughout the country, there's really a telephone subsidy to build copper networks to support the operational expenses and upgrades of these networks. So we were in the process of overbuilding our entire cooperative network, which primarily one county, Wilkes County, North Carolina, which is the upper northwestern part of North Carolina, right on the Appalachian Trail. We had finished about half our network. We had received also some stimulus funding from the 2008, crisis that we had. In 2008, we applied for some stimulus funding. We used that funding to completely overbuild our cooperative network with a fiber to the home transmission system. It was gigabit symmetrical. And at that point in time, we were looking at potentially losing about, I'd say, half of our revenues, 9 million of our 18 million in federal support over the next 10 years. We put together basically a 10-year plan through 2020 to try to triple the size of the company to replace these subsidies. At the time, the FCC said if you had completed fiber, it was mission accomplished, and they were going to try to push this money to just, areas that only had copper and that, didn't have access to what was considered high-speed broadband at that point in time, which was, speeds of 10 and 1. So once we finished that network, we were looking at opportunities, and we focused on three things: public-private partnerships, mergers, and acquisitions. So right around 2014, we were finishing that network. We were looking at, trying to expand the company. We engaged in our first public-private partnership with Stokes County, North Carolina. We were building a backbone with them, and we looked at applying for some grant funding there. We got into, an acquisition opportunity buying 3 companies from TDS right in 2015 in North Carolina. That was our first acquisitions. Now in 2024, we've completed 18 acquisitions. We merged with another cooperative that was out on the inner banks of North Carolina. 6 of those companies were small wireless companies called WISPs. We were at, I'd say, about maybe 5,000 internet customers. We're now at 35,000 total accounts throughout mostly Virginia and North Carolina. 75% of our customers are on fiber. Right now we operate parts of 68 counties and parts of 5 states. We're in the process of a $330 million project in Virginia, which $290 million of that is grant funded through CAF2 auction funding, RDOF funding, which is another federal auction, about $196 million in state grants, as well as county matching funds. for about a 6,600 mile fiber to the home project, passing over 70,000 locations. It's parts of 17 counties from Richmond all the way down to the North Carolina border.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm just going to try to be brief here and try to go through it all. So, a lot of your focus initially in that the first kind of era of the startup was mergers and acquisitions and looking to kind of jumpstart the business. Um, Fast forward, we had a little bit of some turbulence and support from government grants and funding in that regard. And now that things have kind of leveled off, what's some of the current stuff that you're working on now?
That major project in Virginia. And so we're overbuilding the last 25% of our copper networks. So by 2026, we'll be completely fiber to the home, at least gigabit symmetrical services throughout our entire network of the existing companies that we acquired. The properties that we own in Virginia, they're being overbuilt with grant funding. We're closing on two companies, another two ILECs in Virginia for TDS. That was announced about 3 weeks ago. Part of that was financing through a bank called CoBank. In October, we received a $191.1 million facility for these projects, as well as the overbuild of our existing copper networks. So we are, I say, pretty heavily involved in this massive fiber project from King and Queen County, right outside of Richmond, all the way down through Pittsylvania County, as far as Patrick County in Virginia. So we finished one county. We built that entire county fiber to the home. Every single home in that county is 4,400 homes, has access to fiber to the home, gigabit symmetrical service through our network. And that was partially grant funded through federal, county, and state funding. It's about a $28 million project. They're probably the most connected county in Virginia because we literally connected every single home and business in that county. We're doing the same thing in Pittsylvania County, which is the largest geographic county in Virginia, along with parts of the other 15 counties that we're working in.
It's quite an undertaking to be the one that takes on the task of building the infrastructure for an entire county, let alone neighborhoods or buildings or that sort of thing, which is some of the conversations that I've had recently. But I'm curious to get from your perspective how that infrastructure and investing into that has translated into the actual act of customer acquisition and then serving those customers.
Right. So, when we engineer and design these networks, part of it is it's years of planning. So participating in federal auctions, it's a reverse auction process. You have to identify one based on the maps and the FCC's definition of who's served and unserved, which has changed dramatically over the last 10 years. It was who had, 10 and 1, 25 and 3. They just raised the definition of broadband to 100 meg down and 25 up as eligible for federal funding. So as they keep changing that definition, one, identifying locations that can be applicable to grant funding, because without grant funding, we can't really make this happen. Our model is basically if we can get 80% of the total project funded, which is 100% of the passings, to pass the home, and then we pay for the connections to the home, we can make that model work. So up front, it's a heavily capitalized, sort of endeavor because you're building that network. Ahead of time, we're looking at from a market analysis of those locations, how many of them actually have a customer living there or a business, and then what is our expected take rate? So we normally look at about a 40% take rate of inhabited locations at $100 per account, which is what we've seen traditionally when we're passing homes in these rural environments. So that we model that out. We keep a running 10-year forecast. We have a financial forecast, a balance sheet, P&L for every single county. We look at each one independently because the decisions are made on a county-by-county basis. Matching funds that come from the county require reporting to that county. So one, the financial modeling, the applying for the funding, the engineering and design, the forecast for the CapEx required, the forecast for the take rate, and then pre-marketing ahead of time starts, over a year in advance. And we use a tool called CrowdFiber, which customers can go to our website, they put in their address, they put in their interest, their contact information. That creates leads for us. Then they can also place orders. Everything is driven through that mechanism in these areas. And that is, as we start construction, we do groundbreakings in the counties, along with our county partners. We invite legislators and key stakeholders, those types of things. We hold community events, sign-up days, informational sessions. All of them are county focused. We do regional television ads, ads specific to as we build phases of construction in the counties. So it's all it's a huge coordination of the build schedule, 5 years out. Most of the stuff has to be done by 2026 to build 6,600 route miles and pass, I'd said 70,000 customers. Those are just the funded locations. They're probably going to pass 130,000. And in most of these rural counties, you're only looking at 3 customers per route mile, which a lot of the large companies won't even touch those areas. That's why there's grant funding available. And so the way that we try to work with the counties is try to involve, the county government, county commissioners, the county manager, the school system, the towns, town leadership, all the anchor institutions, hospitals, if there's a community college, fire stations, the libraries, because what we view ourselves as we are also an anchor institution. We're coming in and we're building something that is basic necessity, just like water, electricity, roads, bridges, and so forth. So we want to make sure that we're working in unison and in concert with the people that on a countywide basis that that help us succeed. Without that, there's no point in even doing it. If you don't have a really good county relationship and stakeholder relationship in that county, the project's normally going to fail. And so the counties that we're working in, those counties have put up matching funds for the grants that we've received. You get higher scores by having a county having, some money to put into, the grant application, which is usually about 20%, of what we're asking for. And that leverages that 80% of what we're talking about as far as trying to receive state funding. And we received $150 million in state funding just in this Virginia project alone through the ARPA funding that was out there. That has to be spent by 2026. A lot of the matching funds that came from the counties were also ARPA funds, which had to be used for capital projects like broadband, or you can invest it in schools or, buses and that kind of thing. We found a lot of the counties wanted to invest in broadband. So we kind of knew who we wanted to work with. We had done engineering studies to show them the cost and, what the application size would look like and the locations we were looking to pass. Letters of support, those kinds of things were very helpful. But all that during that process, we were taking interest, garnering interest, and creating a database of customers that we could market to. So the ones that showed interest, that's where it would tell us where we would build first. And then we'd have leads. We reach out to those leads. We have referral programs, those kinds of things. Once people start seeing construction going on and machines in the neighborhoods coming down their roads, a lot of interest starts to sort of bubble up. And that's when you really start to see, a lot of the fruits of our labor coming out with trying to, generate these contacts and these orders, because then they talk to their neighbors and so forth. We do yard signs, we do all kinds of things. But it's really kind of a ground attack. Door hangers, our construction crews, they knock on doors, they do door hangers. So there's a multiple, different ways that we look at trying to engage the local communities that we're in and increase those take rates.
Yeah, you're one of the first people, Eric, that I've talked to where there's like a multi-tier, like multi-prong approach here where you basically become omnipresent in these counties, it looks like, whether that's through the kind of broad reach TV, radio type pre-marketing ads, but then that, one-on-one door knocker, kind of signs, hangers, all that kind of stuff. Out of all of these strategies, it's kind of exciting a little bit to see that they're actually working still, where in other places, big cities or where there's a little bit more competition, they're leveraging more unique things like social media or search traffic or things like that. I'm curious, with this more traditional style of marketing, does that pose any challenges in the way of managing the leads? Because I imagine you probably get an abundance of people inquiring at a certain point, right?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. We use social media as well. I mean, we post progress. A lot of it's generated. We're pushing people to our website. So on our website, we have county specific links for each build, and we have maps showing every location we're going to build to. And a customer can see, if when it's being built, we have estimates on when it's being built, when we're going to get there. Are they in our build plan? When they click on their address, that's where they put the order in. And so that repository of being able to, one, have a public facing map that people could see, and it's in a group, like a kind of a Google Earth format, a map format, and that's we found is kind of I think the most successful way that someone can actually go and find their home or the road that they're on, and then they can see when. All right, one, is it going to be built to? Is it under construction? Is it in a pre-order status, which means, hey, call us up. We're getting ready to hook you up. And so our goal is to use all kinds of different mediums to try to drive people to that website. And a lot of that has to do with, when we meet with the counties and give updates, which is at least every quarter, the newspapers are there. People still read the newspaper in these rural communities. We just started doing regional TV ads, which we've had a huge response from that, believe it or not. The social media we really more so use as updates and posting events and things that we do. I would say that in these rural areas, there's certain things that work and don't work. If you don't have internet, it's kind of hard to go on the internet to see certain things. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And our average customer in these areas, you're talking 55 to 75 years old, right? And so you really have to think about, what do people in that age group, really look at. And so that's what we focused on to try to figure out, well, how do we drive sort of getting people to understand what we're doing? And word of mouth is actually a big thing as well. So engaging in the community with different groups and civic groups. But I will say, prior to the pandemic, we had put ourselves out there as being a company that was willing to go and build in these unserved areas. That was our mission. I mean, we're a cooperative and hard. And so we only build in served and unserved areas.
Due to the nature of it, yeah, you mentioned that some of these underserved or unserved areas, they don't have internet, and they do rely a lot on that word of mouth or that human connection of being involved and one-on-one stuff. I'm curious to know. Okay, first of all, the word of mouth thing is super important, and one thing where I know a lot of businesses struggle is having something or giving people a reason to talk about them. And I'll use Disney as an example. Disney has this thing where they create what's called magical moments, and it happened to me, and this is the only reason I know this exists. I was at one of the theme parks. We were my son wanted one of the ice cream things, and I didn't have enough money, and the kiosk guy obviously saw this conversation going down between me and my kid, and he walked up to us with the ice cream that my kid was asking for, handed it to him, and said, "You are now a recipient of a Disney's magical moment," or something that he said. And it was on the house that gave my kid the ice cream for free, and it was this thing that the employees themselves were kind of empowered to create these magical moments. And here I am, Eric, in a podcast talking about it. And that's what I'm kind of pointing at, is what is it that you guys are doing that's different from anybody else that makes you talk aboutable?
So there's a pent-up demand of people that they want to have this, they need to have it. So I think when you're talking about trying to get customers on a network, our biggest thing is you never have a second chance to make a first impression. So what we want to do is make sure that, and we started something called this customer experience exercise in our company, which is really starting from the top down, looking at anyone who touches a customer. What is that pathway when someone calls for either new service or they have a trouble or they call us? First call resolution, and making sure that we don't hand them off. And each employee can make a decision on, and you talked about it being empowered, which is what this is. Can we give them a discount? Can we give them a credit? Can we give them our promotion? Using their judgment to make sure, because they're brand new to our company, we make sure that when we go to hook them up, one, they have fiber. We walk in that house, their Wi-Fi works. We make sure if they need extenders, they have signal throughout their entire house. And when we tell them what their bill's going to be, it's not a surprise. All these things we've learned are these touch points that can, I would say, damage that first, I think, very critical time period of when you're onboarding someone. Because once that's set up and they think their bill is fair and it's what they expected and the service is working, we pretty much don't get a call from them.
Right.
The networks on fiber are very reliable. They work very well unless we have something like a mass fiber cut, which is really out of our control. One of the things we work on when we have something like that happen is making sure that people have a way to get a text alert or an email when we do have an outage of what's going on and what's happening. It's all about managing expectations. And so if there's ever a disconnect in what that customer was expecting, whether it was on our end or their end, we want to try to make sure we manage that as best as we possibly can. And if it is on our end, then, we really have to bend over backwards to try to make sure that we fix that. Because really, once we get someone, the churn is very low once they're on that network. And in these areas, the first like 20 to 30% is pretty easy. That get to 40, that 10% to get to 40 is pretty hard. To get above 50, you're doing really, really well, and you've saturated that market. And, you have to get a return on this capital, even though a lot of it's grant funded. What pays to maintain the network and pays back, the money that we actually had to borrow for this massive project, which is about $88 million. It's a lot of money. You have to get these customers on that network and you have to keep them. And so I think that, we're constantly in a state of improvement. We're constantly trying to figure out, how are we doing, scheduling appointments, being there when we say we're going to be there, responding to troubles in a timely manner, making sure installs go smooth. We have our tech sign off on things around the home, just making sure that, hey, is the customer satisfied? Did we check this? Did we do a speed test? All these kinds of things. We do follow-up calls with them. We also do something called a net promoter score. That's where every single time we go out to a home or someone calls in for an install or a trouble, they can get a survey. And that asks the customer, basically, would you recommend us to somebody else? It's on a scale of 1 to 10. If you have to have a 9 or a 10, and they're a promoter. If they're not, then they're basically passive. If they're below, I think, a 6, basically it dings your score. So we see that for every single rep, whether they call it in, whether it's a guy, a person went out to the house to do an install, and we can have an interaction with them to, resolve if there is an issue, and or give, take the kudos that we're given and praise our employees and reward them and give them feedback. So we try to have a constant communication loop when it comes to how we handle these customers. That's really what we do. We're a service company. That's what it's all about. And it's how you respond to these types of things that really matter. And that's what gets people talking to each other. So when you're going to a neighborhood and they say, wow, they came out, they showed up on time, it worked, they left, I haven't had a problem, they even called me back. They wanted my feedback, that kind of stuff. When people feel like they're heard, and not just the customers, but also our employees, because they really, the feedback that we get on how to constantly continually improve the way that we treat our customers, the way we service them, it's made us a better company. And I think that's really evolved us into a place where we've gotten to be now. When we were just in one county, we had fiber. We were doing that. When we bought a bunch of companies and had to upgrade them from copper to fiber, and we're building in new networks, it's very hard to create a brand in a place where you've never been before. And so it takes years to do that. And the last thing you want to do is fumble the ball on the goal line when you're in someone's house and they're brand new to you, because every single one of those people that's a promoter, they'll talk to people at the grocery store, at school, PTA meetings, at church. That's where the kind of the magic happens, what you're talking about. And so, there's individual, things that happen that I think I could point to, but I think holistically what I just mentioned, I think is sort of, I don't call it a secret sauce. I think every company should be doing that, doing what we do. And it sounds simple, but you have to have that across the entire organization, right? And everyone has to be in lockstep for what the standards are.
From everything that you've shared, I'm hearing that there's just a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different elements here. There's with the ongoing management of these customer relationships, mapping out their experiences, making sure that all of the touch points make sense or create opportunities to elevate that experience. And then beyond that, there's the feedback loop that you're deploying that allows you to get direct feedback from the people that you're serving, and how you're doing your job and how the people that you employ are doing theirs. And there's a lot of data to manage in all of this. I'm curious what kind of technologies, tools, and things like that, software maybe, that you're leveraging to
Sure.
help you keep all of this from imploding on itself because there's just so much going on.
One of the things that we started doing about going on 3 years now, right when we really started taking on the first county that we were overbuilding, is analytics. So we have taken a just deep dive into analytics software, and the one we use is called Domo. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it integrates with our billing system, our mapping system. So we get real time data, statistical information across the entire spectrum of our business. So we're talking about financials, any kind of customer information you want on installs, any stat having to do with service times, hold time, you name it, we have a metric for it. Because I'm a firm believer, you can't manage what you can't measure, right?
Right.
And you have to give the people that are doing the jobs the information that they need. And so that flows down from, analytics to the managers to the staff, and the staff provides feedback going forward on how we can improve that stuff. It's changed the way we do, the way that we do everything. To take on the kind of project that we're doing in the fashion that we're doing and replicating it, it's almost like a 17-ring circus. If you don't have a handle on it, it can go sideways pretty quick, because it's all about cash flow for us. When you've got 30 different contractors and I think 50 different crews out there putting fiber in the ground, you've got all kinds of work orders. You're tracking it by county. You have to have reporting mechanisms for that. Not just the build, which is hard enough alone, but then the onboarding of the customers, the maintaining of the customers, and then tracking them by service areas. We have I think 30 different areas that we monitor and track as far as we call revenue areas, that are all these different islands of networks that we have. And we have wireline networks and we have fixed wireless networks. They're two different animals. We also sell security. And so understanding, what we bill by customer, who's paying us on time, our payables, all those different things. If you don't have a way to track that, I think you're walking in the dark, and you can't wait 30 days or 60 days after the fact to figure that out. We used to wait to the end of the month to close everything to see how many customers we signed up that month, or we had to wait 45 to 60 days to see what our financials were. We can't live in that kind of world when you're spending. I mean, this year we're spending $50 million in CapEx. We've already spent $25 million through the middle of the year. We're spending $300 million over, a 4-year period. There's just a lot going on when you're talking about, when you spend that money, you have to provide detail to have reimbursements from grants. The way the grants work is you spend it, you prove that you spent it, what you spent it on, and then you get reimbursed. All that has to be on a county level, by a project level, by literally a route level. You can't do the analytics. So we created different dashboards for our construction by phases, maps specific for counties. As I mentioned, we're on our website, locations passed. We're also assessing what opportunities we have in and around the areas that we're building, because there's a huge funding round coming up called BEAD. They're working on, how they're going to distribute this to the states. Virginia, North Carolina, we primarily operate, are two of the top 5 states in the entire country that are going to receive broadband funding. And this will be the last big broadband funding, I believe, opportunity for rural areas. And when we were building and passing locations that aren't funded, as well as, areas that are, contiguous or edge outs from where we're building, these are all opportunities. So understanding, what do we want to apply for in the future? How do we maximize and monetize the areas that we're currently building? All that comes from, these data sets that work from multiple different, I'll call it access points with the vendors that we use. All the information comes from our contractors. It goes into, build dashboards, mapping dashboards, billing and financials. Our phone system, all that information goes in there. The efficiency of our technicians goes into those. We have dashboards for each one. All of our managers can request dashboards to help them manage their staff more efficiently. So I would say analytics is really, and Domo has really turned into something. I mean, we didn't even have analytics 3 years ago. We have 2 full-time people that all they're doing is writing and creating dashboards for us and creating reports.
One thing I was curious about was, is there room for AI in that tech stack to help optimize your data to help manage those relationships? Are you deploying anything in that regard?
We're looking at it from a customer service standpoint. So
Okay.
we've recently gotten into, chats, with our staff. It has to be in a closed environment. A lot of the information that we have a customer is subject to, there's federal regulations, the CP&I regulation, how share with customers and validating the identity of customers. So I think for us, in an online environment and in a closed environment where customers can ask questions from a database that be relevant to things that are pertinent to our business, specifically and our customers on our network, that aren't customer specific information, we think that could be, I think, a very viable option for us to use AI as it stands right now.
Are you looking to like build stuff in-house, or are you, partnering with external parties to help kind of build out that technology?
We're actually just entertaining how we go about even doing it. So
Ah,
we're kind of in the sort of nascent stages of even trying to dip our toe into it.
right.
Right now,
Yeah.
we normally just deal with direct customer interaction with our staff.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense too. There's again, there's a lot of moving parts, things that you got to manage, and making sure that you do that well, or else things come undone very quickly. So totally understandable. To kind of wrap things up here, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of the trends in the market. What's kind of coming down the pipeline? What are you excited for the future?
I think that when you look at fiber and the ability, the what you can do with fiber in certain areas, I think that smart grid for us, mesh networks, wireless mesh networks, creating, I think connecting devices throughout APs and Wi-Fi routers that we have in a home, extending that to schools and school campuses and football, baseball fields, sports fields, downtown areas. Once we build to the rural areas and then we start going into some of these smaller towns, I think it can really change the dynamic of the community that we're serving, because it becomes sort of this holistic network that's connected and it starts to take a life of its own. I mentioned we do have and operate fixed wireless networks. I think there's some. I mean, we own CBRS spectrum. We won a lot of CBRS blocks. I think in 80 different counties, North Carolina and Virginia. And what we hope to do once the fiber funding is done is looking at how do we get out to these very hard to reach places that are extremely high cost. Once a lot of the grant funding has been given out for fiber, to try to utilize, I think, the CBRS spectrum. And I think there's some pretty exciting stuff going on with as far as rate and reach with what some of those networks can do. The networks we currently operate, most of it's unlicensed and it's very limited. But we're seeing, I think, some advances in wireless technology, and particularly using CBRS, that we think can complement what we're doing from a fiber standpoint and take that to another level, especially in a rural application. I'm pretty excited about what the future holds there.
Yeah, that's exciting. My parents live on a farm, and I know how much the battle has been for them to get internet that doesn't feel like you're still on a dial-up modem. So,
I mean, when you talk about rural people who live in rural areas, a lot of them are on farms. They have large, plots of land. One of the things we're trying to do is make sure that we're not just worried about Wi-Fi in the home, but Wi-Fi, out in their yard, out in their shed, their barn, their outbuilding. They can get Wi-Fi access while they're on their tractor mowing grass or, whatever. And so
yeah,
that's another thing that's sort of changed is how you look at coverage even in your own home, because an urban setting, and even a suburban setting is a whole lot different than a rural setting, and it's a game changer for some people. And they don't know what they don't have. They know they want it. They understand that it's great, but until they really have it, it opens up a lot of different things. I mean, you're talking about people in the 55 to 75-year-old range, not just e-commerce, but telehealth, telemedicine, for people that can't travel. I think you talk about digital equity and inclusion. Low income. ACP was a program that enabled us to help subsidize up to $30 a month for certain customers. Hopefully there'll be some other mechanism that will be out there for low income, households and businesses, types of thing. But we have plans for low income people. I think when you start getting down into who can afford the service, educating customers. As a service provider, people look at you for everything, right? That you're
Yeah.
their tech support. You're helping them understand how to use the technology. So I think once we start building the networks and they start to mature, then I think it's up to us to try to educate people on how to actually fully utilize the networks that they've built, because they're just opens up a world of possibilities for people.
Yeah, that's it's challenging work, but it's rewarding work, and it's necessary, I think, for the advancement of our collective communities. So, admirable that you've taken the charge and are kind of leading that pathway forward. To kind of wrap things up here, Eric, I'd love to kind of end on a high note. I would be curious to know if you could provide one piece of advice for somebody who's in a similar role as you, who's looking to kind of continue down that path of building businesses and serving people. What would that one piece of advice be?
I have to say, understanding what you're good at, making sure you have, the right people, having a vision. I think it's very important for you to understand, um, why are we doing what we're doing? How are we going to do it? And then, what does success look like? Um, and then staying true to your mission. Our mission as a cooperative was to serve the unserved. We started ourselves a telephone company because people don't have phone service. Now we're doing the exact same thing for broadband. We're going through this paradigm shift. And so I think just sticking to what we know, trying to just get better about what we're doing, not taking on too much. I think sometimes you can get a little bit, ahead of yourself,
Mm,
and constantly trying to improve, I think is sort of the biggest thing. And never forgetting sort of who you are, what you are, why you're doing it. For us, it's an altruistic kind of motivation, I would say, and that's served us very, very well. I really appreciate working for a cooperative and being able to do things that is not necessarily profit driven. Obviously, we have to, break even, but we put that money back in the communities that we work in. And so I think when you're a service provider and you're investing in communities, you really have to make sure that you're involved in those communities, you're giving back to those communities, and your entire organization understands that mission. So I think I'll leave it at that.
wonderful advice. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, Eric, to pick your brain a little further or perhaps work with you, is that a possibility?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is Eric Cramer, ERICCRMER at myriverstreet.net. I mean, I love to talk about broadband and answer to broadband, or anyone who's out there kind of doing the same thing we are, going to these very hard to reach places. Sharing ideas and talking and collaborating is sort of, I think, it's been some of the most beneficial conversations I've had, because you get great ideas from people that are doing this stuff, because no one has all the answers.
Beautiful. Well, that's we'll make sure we link to all that stuff in the show notes so that you're easily accessible and you can maybe spark some of those conversations. If you wanted to get in touch with me and my team, anybody that's watching or listening, it's nextgengrowth.com. Otherwise, that's it for this episode, and I will see you in the next.